Almost immediately, several people in the audience started screaming. "Quiet," the governor shouted, terrifying the crowd even more. "I told you I will serve justice," she shouted. "The evidence was there. The evidence was overwhelming. You all saw it with your own eyes." She pointed aggressively at the people off to the side, still reading through their mountains of evidence. They have not yet complained, even though they've been looking at the evidence for over 30 minutes now. If the evidence were fake, they would have already found an inconsistency. But they didn't. That is because the evidence is genuine, and the punishments have been just. The governor paused for a couple of seconds, her voice quieter but just as firm. "You are allowed to inquire about the punishment, and you may also view the evidence. Everything is above board and—" Bang! The governor shot her gun at someone nearby, and a hand exploded off their arm. The person stared in shock at their flying hand. Splat! The hand landed on the ground and opened. A crumpled piece of paper lay inside. A small gust of wind uncrumpled the paper and pushed it back onto the pile. The governor spun her gun once. Bang! And turned the guy's hand into bloody mist. "Try destroying evidence again, and your head will be next," the governor said coldly. Moments later, the guy started screaming in pain. Whoom! A gust of wind appeared and pushed him back into the city. It wasn't strong enough to injure him badly, but the landing wasn't pleasant. "Next," the governor shouted. By now, the crowd had lost much of its power, and fewer people stepped forward. Some still tried to instigate an uproar, but the moment anyone did, the governor had a guard pull them out and force them to air their grievances publicly. The method paid off. 2 hours into the hearing, almost nobody dared step out of line. Anyone who did would be singled out, forced in front of everyone, and almost always found themselves with no way to fight the mountain of evidence against them. If 100 people charged someone, even with a gun, they'd be overwhelmed. But if the 100 stood still and had to start running first, things were different. A group's strength came from its members being just individuals. Some of them would die, but the odds that it would be any specific member were low. If the 100 stood still, though, someone had to start running first. For that person, the group no longer mattered. The moment they moved, they were alone. Instead of a 5% chance of dying, they faced a 100% chance. The group needed sacrifices to build momentum, and those sacrifices had to be voluntary. Someone had to jump into the hole and become a bridge of their own corpse. Naturally, nobody would do that for rich strangers they barely knew. Within a couple of hours, there was silence. Nobody dared stand out. Nobody dared start a revolt. They were a powerful group, but they couldn't wield themselves as a weapon. That took unity and trust. Soldiers charged the front line because they fought for something greater than their own lives, and because deserters were executed anyway. Even someone willing to become the sacrificial lamb would need other sacrifices to follow, and they didn't believe anyone would. That made the sacrifice meaningless, so they chose to stay alive instead. If they were going to sacrifice themselves, it wouldn't be for nothing. "Nobody else?" the governor asked. Nobody stepped forward. They glanced at each other in annoyance, wishing somebody else would step forward, angry that nobody would sacrifice themselves for the good of the group. Oh, how selfish everyone else was. Naturally, asking the complainers to become the sacrifice themselves wasn't the same. After all, they had a family, or their business was doing well, or they had something amazing that would help others, or they were planning to leave the city soon anyway. No, they had good reasons not to sacrifice themselves, but plenty of others didn't have such good reasons. Those people should sacrifice themselves for the good of the group. Oh, how selfish they were. "Then the public hearing is over," the governor announced. "Please disperse and return to your homes. Anyone remaining in front of headquarters without explicit reason will be taken into custody for a month." The people were angry and frustrated, but then one person left, garnering hateful glances from everyone else. Then another left, then 2 more. Finally, the crowd began to leave as a unit. Watching them disperse, the governor finally calmed down. This had been a crazy day. It was hard to believe the revolt had been stopped, and even harder to believe that nothing horrible had happened. "This is power," Nick whispered in her mind. "Humans desire happiness for themselves and their loved ones. You have the power to take their happiness away. Humans will swallow a lot of shit, frustration, and anger to keep their happiness alive. As long as you keep threatening their happiness, they will do whatever you tell them to do." "However," Nick said louder, "they must have happiness first. If they don't have it, you can't take it away and they'll have nothing to lose. They must have food, money, friends, belongings, and family. The less they have, the harder they are to control. Threatening a homeless person with taking their home away won't have any effect. The governor listened. She had never viewed ruling a city this way. As long as she kept the powerful people happy, she could do whatever she wanted. That was how she'd ruled the city until now. At first glance, Nick's words and actions seemed contradictory. He spoke of giving people happiness while ordering her to kill and threaten them. And yet, somehow, it made sense and it worked. The governor took a deep, covert breath and walked back into the city headquarters. It seemed the entire incident was over. Find an isolated place and tell your people you won't be reachable for a couple of hours, Nick whispered to her. The governor felt nervous. Most of the time she could tell where Nick was, but sometimes, like now, she couldn't. She still heard his voice in her mind, but not knowing where he was made her feel powerless. Nevertheless, she did exactly as he said. A couple of minutes later, she entered her office, not very big but not small either. Nick appeared in the corner of the room. Beside him stood several stones she'd never seen arranged like this before. Without a word, Nick turned to the stone circle and poured Zephyx into it. The largest stone transformed into a muscular figure who looked at Nick before glaring at her. She knew immediately who this was. Despite having worked for Gluttony before, she had never actually seen Gluttony or a major relay. This was her first time seeing one of the corruptors, even second-hand. "You will be my servant," Wrath spoke with unending rage. The governor's breath caught, sweat breaking out from fear. This was one of the corruptors, a peak fallen. "Why, yes, Lord Wrath," she said, lowering herself to one knee, unsure how to address a corruptor. "My assassin will tell you how to run the city," Wrath said. "When the city is ripe, I will send one of my demons to harvest the conflict. As a reward, you may absorb part of the Zephyx they produce." "Thank you, my lord," the governor said fearfully. Wrath glared at her in silence. "Do not disappoint me, or it will be the last thing you do." Then the major relay deactivated. Chapter 644, Food Companies. The city began to change. A couple of days after the public hearing, Happiness Through Taste was dissolved. All the extractors not involved in illegal activities were absorbed into the city's forces. The Specters were also confiscated. The manufacturers were shocked and outraged when they heard they were the ones who took care of the Specters. As it stood, the city barely owned any. Over 90% sat in the hands of private manufacturers, a worse ratio than Crimson City had faced before Nick took over. The city had only one hero, the governor, and two specialists. Its central power was extremely weak. But with the new Specters and Extractors, the city now had enough power to rival the third strongest manufacturer, which had around 3 specialists and 15 experts. The city had 2 specialists, 1 hero, and about 10 experts, still nothing compared to Vertigo Box or Swirling Abyss, both of which had over 10 specialists each. As soon as the city announced it would confiscate all Specters, the manufacturers grew angry and protested. But the most important ones were missing from the protest: Vertigo Box and Swirling Abyss. Neither was interested in fighting over a few Specters. They had bigger targets each other. Whichever absorbed the other would rule the city regardless, and everything in it would belong to them anyway. Without those two, the remaining manufacturers hit a wall negotiating with the governor. Some heated exchanges happened, but nothing came of them. Nick had navigated plenty like this in Crimson City. In the end, the manufacturers gave up. They complained, cried, resisted, and eventually accepted their new reality. Within a month, the chocolate situation had been dealt with. The people who'd eaten it either died or recovered from its addicting effects. The city kept buying food from the caravans, but since none of it went toward chocolate anymore, it now had a surplus to sell. Yet food prices didn't drop, people still starved. But how? Where was all the surplus food? Decomposing. The food companies had realized they'd earn more through artificial scarcity. For every piece they sold, they let 5 others rot. Nick noticed quickly and told the governor what to do. Within a week, a new law passed. Due to a lack of strong and healthy people, production in the city has been crippled. In order to stimulate the economy, a maximum price on food is put in place. This will increase the overall health of the city, create more able-bodied people, and will increase production while lowering labor costs. The rich people welcomed the change. They'd been employing 3 starving people to do the work of 1 able-bodied person. Raise an able-bodied worker's wage by 50%, and they'd have a happy worker at half the cost. The owners of the food companies, of course, were enraged, but this time the powerful weren't united. The food companies were on their own. They couldn't get the governor to change the law, but that didn't mean they were powerless. So they did the very thing the governor had feared during the last riots. They protested. They refused to buy food from the caravans, refused to do business, and closed their doors. The citizens were terrified. They were losing the little food they had access to. Starvation worsened. The city did nothing for the first couple of days. After 5, it opened its emergency stores and handed food to those closest to starvation. But the stores weren't bottomless. A month passed. Caravans arrived every couple of days but left without selling anything. The stores kept shrinking. The food companies felt victorious. Then after a month something changed. A caravan arrived and all of its food was purchased by the city. The food companies weren't surprised. They'd expected it and were only surprised it had taken this long. It only made the city's problem worse, they figured. The only thing the city had ever bought was Zephyx for Aegis. It had never sold anything. Its people were extractors and administrators, not businessmen. Trying to run an entire sector of business, they'd lose money instead of making it. Leading a big company wasn't easy. Now the true terror of the city arrived, the free market. The food companies laughed when the city started selling food for 1/10 of the price. By their calculations, the city was losing money, spending 20% more buying food than it made selling it. Unsustainable. They watched for another month as the city kept spending wantonly. Then they decided to ramp up the pressure. They'd buy a big chunk of the food from the next caravan and show the government what it meant to mess with the leaders of an entire sector. The next caravan arrived, and the food companies demanded 70% of its food. They were promptly turned down. Sorry, but we made an exclusive contract with the city. Last time we tried to sell to you, you left us hanging, and we lost 3 million credits when the food decomposed. The city has guaranteed a minimum purchase for the next 5 years. The food companies were shocked and tried to renegotiate, even offering 20% more than before. Apologies, but the security of the contract matters more in the long term. They failed, and they failed the next time, and the next. Every caravan visited at least once a month, meaning this was its 3rd visit since the war started. Nick had deliberately skipped buying the first time, costing the caravans a couple million credits. During the second month, with that painful loss still fresh, Nick started buying but changed the deal. The city would pay slightly less, but guarantee the caravan at least a couple million credits every visit, buying the food even when it didn't need it. Within a week, the food companies realized there was no way to procure food anymore. And before they could come up with a plan, the next tragedy struck. Their bat caves were dying. The bats fed on insects inside human corpses, but with deaths dropping drastically, half the bats were starving. Then they realized something even worse. The city was actually making money selling food. It wasn't running at a deficit. But how? They would have run at a deficit doing this. The reason was simple. No dividends were paid out, no executives ate a chunk of the profit. Without those, the food business's revenue slightly exceeded its cost, and the small profit it made was stored for bad times. This business hadn't been built to grow, it was built to keep running indefinitely. That didn't mean nobody profited. Nick knew economics well enough to know he needed money moving hands faster. Food prices were low and affordable to everyone. But there was one thing the city didn't do: prepare it. Everything it gave out was raw and unprepared, though the city did hand out free basic cookbooks, Nick's idea. Results followed quickly. Privatized food distributors, food halls, restaurants, chefs, cooks. By elevating raw, cheap food into something worth eating, people could sell it for insane prices. For the first time in their lives, the city's people tasted true flavor. And they became hooked. Chapter 645, Economic Rise. The age of cooking had arrived. It started with someone putting a bit of salt on a baked potato. When the neighbors tasted it, they realized it was far better than theirs and wanted the secret, but the person wouldn't tell them. They were willing to trade 2 tasty potatoes for 3 boring ones, though, or 1 credit for 5 tasty ones. Cooking had been a dead art in Black Mine City. The richer people had finer cuisine, but it was just caravan food smoked and dried for preservation. Cooks barely existed, and the few who did had almost no way to improve their methods. But now that everyone had food, more people found ways to innovate. The city had been starved of flavor for decades. Even a small improvement felt like a breakthrough. Cooks stole and bought recipes from each other, combined them with their own, and sold their creations. Some chose to sell simple food at scale, mess halls. Others crafted finer dishes at a smaller scale, restaurants. Some cooked only for a handful of elites, private chefs. The restaurants and mess halls needed people to track sales, accountants. Some streamlined the process of buying and selling ingredients in bulk wholesalers. As food began traveling farther with more stops, someone took on managing that too, logistics. As the industry advanced, cooks needed better equipment, and the city's tool manufacturers branched into a new line, cookware, which needed more hands to build. Very quickly, popular restaurants and mess halls came under attack from spies and thieves after their secret recipes. Luckily, people were willing to risk their lives for good pay security guards. Eventually, the businesses started pressuring officials against each other, drawing in people skilled at arguing and investigating lawyers. With everyone busy working, raising children grew difficult, so others stepped in, nannies and teachers. Some restaurants realized they could charge more by looking richer and more prosperous, and demand for designers and architects shot up. That meant more houses and furniture needed building, builders and carpenters. This was how society worked. As long as money kept moving and people kept spending, more room for jobs appeared. Over several months, Nick watched the city transform. From a mass of starving people, distinct groups emerged. Food was no longer an issue, freeing people to focus on other things. Color returned to the city, people grew louder and happier. Almost nothing was purely positive or negative. Good came bundled with bad. After decades of starvation, most people couldn't resist eating without end. Many couldn't handle the sudden abundance. They ate too much, straining their bodies until their hearts gave out. Those who survived kept eating and grew fat. Within a year, being overweight had become the norm, not healthy, but still better than being severely underweight, which caused problems in both the present and the future. At least people weren't working themselves to death. Since nearly everyone was fat now, everyone felt more lethargic, and the workplace grew more relaxed. It became normal to sit and pant in exhaustion for 5 minutes every hour. Almost everyone did it. After a year, the original food companies had shrunk drastically. Cut off from the caravans, they were forced to buy from the city, but who would buy from them when the same food was cheaper straight from the source? Some went out of business. A few managed to pivot into restaurants and mess halls. While the city center transformed, its edges changed too. Some businessmen invested in local food, digging caves into the mountain to experiment with growing crops that needed little light. Since the city sat inside a mountain, growing food took up too much space to be worth it before, but now, growing locally had insane potential. Almost all the city's food came from caravans built to keep food edible over long routes, meaning local growth could yield far better ingredients. Turning that into reality would take a while, but wasn't impossible. They just needed a way to convert caravan food into local food, animals that ate the caravan food itself. All told, the city's economy was exploding, giving it far more credits to purchase Zephyx. At the same time, Zephyx's price was falling. At first glance that seemed strange. A better economy should mean people paying more for things, driving the price up. So why was it falling? Because the Zephyx engineers were producing far less material made from it. The number of veterans and experts had dropped by over 10%. While the city surged, Vertigo Box and Swirling Abyss were at each other's throats. A secret war fought mostly outside the city. Whenever they clashed inside it, powerful guards arrived and took both sides into custody before a winner emerged. It was almost as if the guards knew exactly where the battles would happen. After the 5th time, both manufacturers were sure it wasn't coincidence somehow, the governor knew. So they moved the fighting outside the city. Many extractors died, and since killing an extractor from a rival manufacturer wasn't illegal, the victors didn't need to hide their loot. They could openly wear and use the dead's equipment. That would have been impossible in Crimson City, where killing extractors was illegal. With fewer extractors, the demand for equipment dropped, meaning the Zephyx engineers bought less, and the city could buy more Zephyx for less money. It had been 24 months since Nick first arrived in Black Mine City. The city was undergoing a huge glow-up while the manufacturers tore into each other. Normal citizens were finally experiencing happiness, and now had a lot more to lose. "The seed has germinated," Nick said. "It is ready to be harvested." Finally, Wrath spoke through gritted teeth, looking at the city with hatred. "I will send my servant to the city. You will get her inside and let her stir up conflict. I want eternal war here." "Yes, my lord," the governor said. Nick just nodded, looking at the city. "Expect my servant by tomorrow." Then the greater relay deactivated. The governor took a deep breath. Nick studied the city, remembering what it had looked like when he first arrived, filled with immeasurable suffering. Now people led normal lives, if heavier ones. "This is already much better than when I arrived," Nick thought. "I saved the lives of thousands. I'm another step closer to redeeming myself." He glanced at the governor. Although I have to increase their suffering a little again to secure my chance to help even more people, Wrath needs to be somewhat satisfied, so he sends me to the next city, otherwise he'll just kill me. I just need to integrate Wrath's servant into the city's ecosystem. It won't be easy, but I've seen it work in Mark Wild City. It's still much better than the constant starvation before. Nick looked toward the city's exit. This is a good opportunity to send Aegis a message about my current status. Chapter 646, Food for the Lord. Wait, what? A guy in Vertigo Box uniform said, looking at another guy in the office. How am I so hard to understand? The other guy shouted. I said we should have an all-out battle with Swirling Abyss right now. Let's just ignore all this stupid scheming. The first guy and a third guy stared at him in shock. Are you mental, Alvin? The first guy shouted. We can't just fight them. What is wrong with you? Alvin looked deeply hurt, which confused them even more. I'm not mental, Martin, Alvin said. You didn't have to say that. You could have just said you disagreed. You're the CEO. You decide what we do anyway. No reason to be so aggressive. Martin and the third guy, Sten, looked at each other. Are you okay? Sten asked. You've been acting strangely these past few days. Did something happen during that strange meeting? Alvin furrowed his brows. I don't see how I'm acting strangely. We just talked normally, tried to get on the same page about some conflict, and naturally failed. The other two looked at him with concern. These three were the leaders of Vertigo Box, all three initial heroes, Martin the CEO, Sten the CZE, Alvin the CFO. Are you sure? Sten asked. Of course I'm sure, Alvin shot back. Can you stop shouting for once, Alvin? Martin asked. What, this is my fault now? Alvin said, feeling insulted. You two keep criticizing me without end. Am I not allowed to defend myself? We're not attacking you, Sten said. We're just talking normally. Just like me, I'm also just talking normally. Stop, Martin said, taking a deep breath. Alvin, I think you're a bit stressed about the conflict. I believe it'd be in everyone's interest if you took a couple of days off. We'll handle things. Alvin looked ready to explode again, but instead took a deep breath. Maybe you're right. Maybe I was a bit loud. I'll deal with the finances for a couple of days before focusing on the conflict again. The other two nodded. After a bit, Alvin walked out, and the other two exchanged a look. What was wrong with him? Meanwhile, a couple of kilometers away. Nurgle, what do you think? A guy in Swirling Abyss uniform asked. Nurgle grunted, bored. Seems too risky. Silence. Yees, the first guy said. And why is that? Our extractors could die, Nurgle said. Yeah, I know, a third guy said with annoyance. That's always a possibility during an ambush, but like I explained, the chances of it failing are at most 30%. I don't see how that's risky. Then go do it, Thor, Nurgle said with a sigh. The other two furrowed their brows. Nurgle, can you please take this seriously? The CEO of Swirling Abyss, Carl, asked. You've been giving non-committal, short answers the entire meeting. I am taking it seriously, Nurgle said, rolling his eyes. I just don't see why we'd take such a risk. I wouldn't bet my life on 70%. It's unnecessary. We're not betting our lives, Thor, the CZE said. If it were about the company's survival, sure, 70% would be too low, but the worst that happens is 2 veterans die. Okay, Nurgle said. Silence. Thor and Carl exchanged a look, then looked back at Nurgle. Is that all? Carl asked. Yeah. Carl sighed. Nurgle, did we offend you somehow? No. Silence. Boot, Thor asked. What but? Weren't you about to say but? No, I wasn't. Silence. Okay, what's going on, Nurgle? Carl asked. You're acting unusual. What's on your mind? Nothing, Nurgle said with a shrug. Is this about the meeting from a week ago? You've been acting weird for days. Nurgle shrugged. No, everything's fine. We just talked about some conflict but couldn't get on the same page. Nothing strange happened. Then what's up with you? Thor asked. What do you mean? This, Thor shouted. You barely say anything. You shrug like nothing matters. You show no emotion. You act like you don't give a shit about anything anymore. Nurgle shrugged. No idea what you mean. Everything seems just like always. Is this some kind of game? Carl asked. You're obviously acting differently. How? Nurgle asked, bored. Carl took a deep breath. Nurgle, please leave the room. I don't know what's going on with you, but we can't make progress when one of our strongest people is acting like this. Think about your conduct today. I'm open to a man-to-man talk later. Nurgle rolled his eyes. Sure. He walked to the door. See you, he said with a wave, and left. Afterward, the other two exchanged a worried look. It seemed both manufacturers had issues with one of their leaders, but thanks to the conflict between them, neither knew about the other's troubles. About a week later, the two manufacturers received an important message. The governor wanted to talk to the CEOs about defining more laws around the conflict. They would still be allowed to kill each other, but she wanted to minimize harm to the general population. Only the CEOs were permitted to attend, to keep the chance of a sudden fight low, and if it were just the two of them, the governor, stronger than either, would hold significant leverage. One day later, the two CEOs gathered in front of the city's headquarters. "Ah, nice to see you again, Martin," Carl said, smiling, offering his hand to his enemy. "Oh, it's been too long, Carl," Martin answered with a laugh, shaking it. Though they were trying to kill each other, they looked like old friends. "Why don't we go in?" Martin asked, gesturing to the building. "Of course." They walked in, making small talk. The governor was already in the main hall. "Carl Martin," she greeted. "Serna," they answered with a nod. Serna gestured to the stairs, and the three of them went up to the 7th floor. She stopped in front of a huge gate and her barrier activated. The gate slowly opened, revealing the room inside. "That's quite some expensive material," Carl said, looking at the abyss-black walls. "This is our new meeting room for sensitive discussions," Serna explained. "Completely isolated like a containment unit built from material that could even hold a demon. I only use it for the most important meetings." The two CEOs inspected it closely. Sure enough, completely isolated. The three of them entered, and the gate began to close. Bang! The gate shut, and the three of them were alone. "Well then," Serna said, "shall we get to it?" And then, ding! All the lights turned off. Carl and Martin immediately panicked and pulled out their weapons. Bang! A gun fired, illuminating the room for a moment. Carl saw Serna and Martin moving toward him. Martin saw Serna and Carl moving toward him. Serna saw Martin and Carl aiming at each other. Bang, bang, bang. The two of them began fighting each other as Serna stood back. At the same time, a black mist appeared behind Carl and formed into a human with a blade. CRK. The blade broke Carl's barrier. At the same time, a three-headed figure appeared behind Martin, long black hair on all three heads, each with a different expression. The one on the left was crying. The one on the right was laughing. The one in the middle looked disinterested. 6 arms shot out and scratched at the barrier in front of them with terrifying speed. Bang! Martin's barrier broke too. Both men fell into a panic, and with no Zephyx left, the nightmare's influence overtook them completely. Nick controlled that influence and knocked them unconscious, while shielding Serna from it himself. "Do it," Nick said to the three-headed figure. It stepped between the two unconscious men and moved its arms in a mystical pattern. A moment later, colorful gas drifted out of Carl and into Martin's body. The figure began to cry and laugh. "More food for the Lord," it shouted. Chapter 647, New Specter. Nick watched as the two men slowly regained consciousness, the three-headed silhouette still laughing and crying beside them. Since their barriers had broken, their Zephosis had stopped, but enough Zephyx was being generated in the room that their bodies quickly restarted it. A moment later, the lights turned back on and Serna could see again. Even though this was the second time this had happened, she still felt scared whenever the lights went out. But who could blame her? Darkness represented unending suffering for all humans. There had never been a point in anyone's life where it wasn't tied to horrendous suffering. Logic didn't help against a fear that primordial. The two men looked confused. "So," Serna asked the CEO of Vertigo Box. "Huh? What's your answer?" The CEO grabbed his head. "Sorry, what was the question again?" "Are you willing to hold off on any fights within the city limits for the next 3 months?" Serna asked, a bit annoyed. "We want time to come up with a working rule set that accommodates everyone. Carl has already agreed." Carl shook his head in confusion. He didn't remember agreeing to that. But the more he thought about it, the more familiar it seemed. "Yeah, right," Carl said. "We need clearer rules for the battle. We might be at each other's throats, but this is all just business. What's the point of winning if the winner only gets a destroyed city? I already said that earlier." Martin also started to remember the conversation and how adamant Carl had been about the pause, desperate for a temporary ceasefire, in his memory. He also remembered pushing back against it. "This feels like favoritism," Martin said. "We're currently in an advantageous position, and at exactly this moment you're asking for a ceasefire." Zerna kept her annoyance hidden and glanced at the gigantic three-headed figure between them. The laughing head laughed louder while the crying head wept harder. The neutral head just sighed. I told you that could happen. After the transferal, their memories generate automatically along the most obvious pattern. He sees the other guy as an enemy, assumes anything the enemy wants is something he doesn't want, and believes he was against this option all along. There's nothing I can do. How are you in an advantageous position? Zerna asked Martin. We just won a battle, he answered. Zerna took a deep breath and braced for a long discussion. She just wanted this over with. Nick remained hidden inside a compartment in the wall, invisible to the Extractors, but not to the Specter. He watched it through his perception while Zerna and Martin argued. This Specter was terrifying. 3 tall women fused into a single body. A mid-demon, it grew stronger by transferring emotional sensitivity and the suffering caused by the resulting imbalance. It could siphon emotional sensitivity from one person and inject it into another. Within days, both people would change drastically. One would become an unstable, crazy person who felt everything at insane intensity. A mild joke triggering intense laughter, mild criticism triggering frothing rage, a sad story triggering a full grief cycle. That was how extreme it got in weaker people. Someone as powerful as a hero would still feel it intensely but retain much better control. The other person, meanwhile, became a disinterested machine, feeling nothing at a joke, nothing at criticism, nothing at an attack. One might think that sounded like an ordinary Specter, but it wasn't. A Specter wanted to survive and cause suffering. Someone afflicted by this one didn't even want that. What was the point of growing stronger? What was the point of doing anything? Nothing mattered. The only reason these people kept talking and acting was habit and the absence of urges like hunger, sex, and sleep. They just continued, because that was what they'd always done. This Specter was one of Wrath's servants, and the future ruler of the city. By tomorrow, Zerna would summon the 2 CZEs of the manufacturers for a final meeting, and the Specter would do the same to them. After that, it could walk through the city unseen by any hero. For a mid-demon, abducting a few specialists wasn't difficult, and it would finish manipulating all of them within a couple of weeks at most. And the strongest people in the city would be under its control. Over time, Vertigo Box and Swirling Abyss would change drastically, Vertigo Box launching sudden, stupid assaults, Swirling Abyss winning more often than not but never landing a decisive strike, since they simply didn't care enough. Eventually, the 2 manufacturers would split the city into 2 camps, each with its own name for the other. One called itself the Humans and the rival the Machines. The other also called itself the Humans and called its rival the Animals. One side believing the other lacked basic emotion and humanity, the other believing its rival had lost control of its emotions and turned feral. This was the Specter's plan for sustaining conflict in the city. Eventually, Zerna convinced Martin to accept the armistice. The 2 CEOs left, and Nick emerged from his hiding spot. The Specter vanished from the room, leaving only an echo of laughter and crying. Zerna released a sigh of relief once it was gone. She was always nervous around it. Compared to the chocolate Specter, this one was lucid and could make conscious decisions. It also felt quite different from Nick, the Specter she'd worked with for the past 2 years. Working with Nick felt like working with a human superior. He explained things and told her exactly what to do. This new Specter just said what it wanted and left her to figure out how. At least she'd earned good Zephyx for the trouble. Production had increased significantly, and the city's control was much stronger. People were happier too, though she didn't much care about that. When are you going to leave? She asked Nick. I'll contact Wrath in a week and get new orders, Nick said, not turning to her. Zerna thought of the new Specter and felt a flicker of nerves. Can't you stay? No, the other servant will run this city. She wanted to say more, but Nick left before she got the chance. He knew how she felt, but the only thing he felt for her was disregard and disgust, an opportunist who didn't care about the suffering she inflicted on the powerless. Few things disgusted Nick more. You have about 10 to 20 more years, he thought, her image floating in his mind. Then your entire world will come crashing down. He looked out at the city. It had changed significantly since he'd arrived. He could hear actual laughter now. That wouldn't vanish. In the future, the city would split into 2 camps locked in constant civil war, but within each xenophobic group, people would still help each other, closer than before, even now that both sides had an enemy to focus their hatred on. I'm not sure how many more cities I can improve before I return to Aegis, Nick thought. The important part is that Aegis now knows I'm alive, and what happened to me. Yes, Nick had already made contact with Aegis, and it hadn't even been difficult. As for how he'd done it, well, Chapter 648, Blackmail. Ah, fuck me. Why are you so tight today, girl? Did that old bastard annoy you again? A naked man was going to town on a tall, muscular woman. He stood barely 160 cm. She stood around 185. He was thin and meek. She looked like she compressed metal into cubes for a hobby. He had long, flowing hair. She had a buzz cut. As they went at it, the air vibrated with every thrust, and the furniture shook. The guy threw everything into it while the woman lay there like a corpse. Went too hard on the abs, she said in a cold, raspy voice. They're cramping, I like the pain, makes me feel alive. Ah, fuck, this feels good, but I'll feel it tomorrow too. Don't do that too often, but please keep doing it. Wait, what did I just say? I dunno, not coherent right now, busy as well, fucking hell, you enjoying yourself at least. Her body rocked back and forth as she stared at the ceiling, distracted. Yeah, feels good, she said after a while. They kept going for several minutes, the guy going harder and harder. The whole building shook, and the trees outside swayed with it. A gardener struggled to cut a branch as the leaves kept swinging. You ready? The guy grunted. Ima, do it, I'm going to do the commas. The woman rolled her eyes at the phrasing. Come on, it was funny, ha, ha, ha. No. Except for the rhythmic slapping, silence. Sorry, he grunted. Not doing that again, okay? Okay. The rhythmic slapping continued. Prepare yourself, the woman said. The man grew excited. Then she strained her abs with all her power, striking a pose while lying down. His mouth fell open as he felt an apocalyptic force trying to flatten his dick into 2 dimensions. Elja. Ding. The small sound of paper, moving outside the established rhythm of meat slapping. Bang. The 2 of them split apart and had weapons pointed at the door before the last pulse of the moment had even passed. The man aimed both guns down the hallway while his dick kept bobbing, firing powerful bursts of white liquid at the walls, shaking the house further. This was a hero. The force behind his climax was incredible. His orgasm was ruined, but he was too busy assessing the danger to care. He was sure he'd heard paper moving. He glanced at the woman. She jumped up too, which meant he hadn't imagined it. Someone had been here. Can you sense anyone? He asked, serious now. No. Their perceptions already covered kilometers around them, and neither saw anything out of place. He scanned the house again. Wait, did you put that paper on my desk? Her perception stretched into his office. She couldn't read the paper without seeing it directly, but she felt a stack sitting on the desk. Their memories were impeccable, and she didn't remember any paper being there. No. He narrowed his eyes and vanished, reappearing an instant later in his office in front of the stack. She arrived right behind him. His mind absorbed the first sheet instantly. Blackmail, he said. Blackmail, she said, furrowing her brows. That's idiotic. He read through the stack. She read along with him. They're trying to blackmail you with our relationship, she said, annoyed. That's dumb. We're the 2 strongest extractors in the city. The first stack detailed their relationship and a few of their darker dealings. What's the point? She asked as he kept turning pages. It's not officially announced, but this stuff isn't secret. So what if the governor and the biggest manufacturer are allies? We produce plenty of Zephyx. The governor kept reading, brows furrowed. Yes, but he just doesn't know. She rolled her eyes. And they wouldn't care. We deliver more Zephyx than necessary. He reached the last page of the first stack. As soon as it was revealed, the atmosphere changed, and the 2 of them charged into the bedroom. There was a head in their bed. Jim, the woman said in shock. He's one of my team leads. I know, the governor said, brows furrowed. He looked back at the last page. It said they'd find some incentive for cooperating with the blackmailer in their bed. Neither said anything, but inside, they were both shaken. Not only had the blackmailer smuggled a stack of paper into a house with 2 heroes inside, they'd also placed a head in the bed while both were on high alert, and neither had noticed it happen. The skill required was beyond ridiculous. Both were confident nobody in the city could pull off something like that. After a few seconds, the woman took a shaky breath. She was no longer calm. What do they want? She asked. The governor walked back into his office, brows furrowed. Not much. They just want me to deliver a short message to Aegis. A message? He held up the first page again. It simply stated that the governor had to transmit a letter to the local Aegis stronghold. He grabbed the sealed black envelope. I can't see through it. Me neither. Silence. How am I supposed to bring this to the local stronghold? The governor asked. I can't just leave the city, and I can't just ask someone to come here for a letter. The next tribute payment is 8 months away, and I don't know if this message needs to go out fast or can wait. This is frustrating." "Are you going to do it?" she asked, a bit surprised. Usually, when someone tried to pull something on the governor, he only grew more resistant. His defiance in the face of opposition was part of what had drawn her to him. Silly in private, but competent and reliable when it mattered. CRKSH. He tore open the letter. "Well, I have to know what it says to know what I'm supposed to do." They read through the message quickly. It was short. 2 years. Complete fusion happened. Am undercover. Come back in decades. Will deliver. See codes as proof. At the bottom were 2 long codes. "What are these?" she asked. "Codes for entries in Aegis database," the governor said. "This person most likely belongs to Aegis if they know them." He left the room and headed for the house's basement. "What are these entries?" she asked, following. He activated his barrier to open a fortified door. "Sorry, I can't tell you until I check them myself. Please wait outside." Bang! The door closed. Inside, the governor approached a console, the city's only link to Aegis network. He logged in and typed in the first code. His brows furrowed. "You do not have permission to view this entry." He rubbed his chin. Meanwhile, thousands of kilometers away, in a dim room. Ding! A black barrier turned on. The left arm opened her eyes. Someone tried to access the hidden entry about the nightmare's location, she thought. Her perception extended toward the underground of Aegis headquarters. "Send someone to Craven Dog City," she said to the technician. "The local governor tried to access the nightmare's hidden entry with his account. I want to know what's happening there." "Oh," the technician said. "That's not good. I'll send an enforcer immediately." Chapter 649, Immediate Goals. Nick had contacted Aegis a couple of weeks before the new Specter started influencing the leaders of Vertigo Box and Swirling Abyss. Given how he'd done it, he had no idea how they'd react to learning he was now a Specter. He'd simply left them a message. As soon as the city's governor received Nick's request, the message was effectively already delivered to Aegis. If he handed the letter to the tax collectors, Aegis would get it and nothing would happen to him. If he opened it instead, Aegis would still get the message, but he'd have some explaining to do. Nick knew the database entry on the Nightmare's location carried the highest level of security. Only a shield could grant access, and there was no way to find it by searching. One could only reach it by typing the address directly. Any access attempt would be logged, and a shield notified immediately. When Arya had looked at the entry after Nick became liaison, the left arm had received a notification too, but dismissed it since it came from Crimson City's console. She knew Nick was there and saw no issue, since access had been denied anyway. But a random attempt from the middle of the Grand Continent, in a city with no history of anyone trying after years of silence, was extremely strange. Nick had known this would happen. Even if the governor destroyed all the evidence, Aegis would still want to know how he'd found the entry in the first place. Nick just hoped they wouldn't treat him like any other Specter. That was still a risk. The best thing he could do was keep improving cities and gathering intel. After 10 or 20 years, he'd go to Aegis and unveil everything he'd learned, exposing several cities under Wrath's control and dealing it a devastating blow. Wrath would see him as an enemy after that. It wouldn't be hard to trace him as the common thread. But that was the future. For now, Nick needed to focus on his immediate goals. First, growing stronger. Nick produced Zephyx by causing suffering, and luckily, doing good didn't cancel that out. He'd helped thousands of people in Black Mine City, but he'd also caused suffering among the elite. Everyone he judged and executed left behind families in anguish. And while the new Specter harvested most of the Zephyx from the conflict between the two big manufacturers, Nick was still partly responsible, so he got a share of the suffering too. That boosted his output by about 40%. Only 40%. Yes, because Nick was still harvesting an immense amount of suffering from things he'd done before becoming a Specter. The survivors of Anatomy were still being punished by Aegis, and he was one of the biggest factors in that. But his biggest source was Marcus Julius, the old governor of Crimson City, now guarding some Aegis stronghold in humiliation, essentially working under a mid-hero constantly, almost entirely because of Nick. That particular suffering always improved Nick's mood when he focused on it. The most important factor was that Nick's growth seemed gated by volume, not time. The more people suffered, the faster he improved. In just 2 years, he'd advanced to early specialist or early fanatic depending on the label. That was insanely fast. He'd also focused on his ability to conjure objects and create manipulation lines. With a Specter core, both had unmeasurable potential. After 2 years of training, he developed two useful abilities, not strong enough for battle but useful nonetheless. One was his method of transmitting his voice. The other was telekinesis. He could lift up to two objects at once, a combined ton, though not yet efficiently. His last goal was to keep improving cities and learn more about the corruptors, maybe even find Wrath's location. The corruptors kept their whereabouts secret, only Envy's was known. These goals would occupy him for decades. It's about time to leave this city, Nick thought, looking out over Black Mine City. It had changed enormously in 2 years and would keep changing. Even if it worsened, it would never sink back to what it had been when he arrived. Yesterday, the Specter had turned the two CZEs of Swirling Abyss and Vertigo box as well. Everything from here on would run itself. The governor had learned enough from him over 2 years that, while she was no Arya, she could run the city halfway decently alone. That's another 4,000 people, Nick thought. Together with Crimson City, that's about 15,000 lives I've significantly improved. His body imitated a sigh. About 1.5% of my goal. He thought back to the people melting in the dregs of Crimson City. He'd forgotten much in his fight against the Dark Mist, but that day he still remembered with total clarity. It's far from enough, but it's a step forward. I thought I'd never redeem myself, but I'm making progress. It doesn't seem impossible anymore. He looked at the city's exit, and I'll keep making progress over the coming decades. For a few minutes he just looked at the city. Then he turned and entered his cave, a temporary residence he'd claimed over the past 2 years, officially just an empty government-owned cave to anyone who checked. He walked deep inside, turned to mist, and flowed through a tiny hole. Behind 10 meters of stone, he'd built an isolated chamber for his greater relay. A moment later, he activated it, and Wrath manifested again. "What do you want?" Wrath asked, unsurprisingly furious. "I'm done with the city. Where do I go next?" Specters didn't feel surprised the way humans did, but they noted when something broke from prediction, and this was one of those moments. Almost all of Wrath's servants were lazy, though the word didn't quite fit. Specters simply cared only about themselves, constantly towing the line between useful enough to survive and not. After a successful mission, servants often went silent for months or years. There was no reward for going above and beyond. Yet Nick had contacted Wrath for his next task almost immediately. Wasn't he interested in growing stronger without risking his life? He controlled this city. He could feed as much as he wanted without hiding from Aegis or the local manufacturers. Any other Specter would have taken that opportunity. It went against every prediction, but Wrath didn't complain. Sometimes Specters acted without rhyme or reason. Over the next few minutes, Wrath laid out the next target. Once again, a city controlled by gluttony. After getting the details, Nick destroyed the greater relay. Transporting the stone circle was more hassle than building a new one, and left Black Mine City without saying goodbye to anyone. Just as abruptly as he'd appeared, he vanished. Chapter 650. The End Justifies the Means. Nick traveled to the next city, about 300 kilometers northeast of Black Mine City. Getting in wasn't difficult, just tall walls and extractors, much like Crimson City. At first, Nick didn't see gluttony's influence at all. The city looked poor, but not in constant starvation. He wasn't even sure this city was truly under a corruptor's control. Maybe Wrath had simply sent him somewhere neutral. Then he noticed the peculiarities. No plumbing anywhere. People shit into boxes. People urinated far less often than normal. He hadn't noticed at first, since he wasn't tracking anyone's bathroom habits, but he caught it from a strange device sitting in nearly every home. Distillation, he thought. A huge pot sat above a reflective indent in the metal ground, topped with a glass lid narrowing into a tube that fed into a second pot. The mechanism was obvious. Contaminated water went into the first pot. The indent below gathered and reflected light to heat it, flammable material being too rare for the average person to burn, and the water evaporated into the second pot. The contents of the first pot were disgusting, yellow sludge or yellow dust, depending on how far along the distillation was. Many homes had brown sludge instead, a sign of kidney failure. That made it clear. These people were being dehydrated while the rich swam in pools. Still, despite it all, they didn't seem as desperate as the people of Black Mine City had been. They suffered, but not as badly. Over the next few days, Nick gathered information. This time, finding Gluttony's servant was the easy part. It was the city's main Specter, not hidden at all. Everybody knew about it. Nobody knew it served Gluttony. That made this city very different from the last. Killing the Specter would mean destroying the city's identity and a huge chunk of its Zephyx output. A list of every city's Specters went to Aegis annually, and this one's continued existence meant Aegis had sanctioned it. But Nick was certain Aegis didn't know it served gluttony. This called for a different approach. First, Nick studied the Specter's owner, the biggest manufacturer in the city, shadowing the elite for weeks. He wanted to remove the corrupt ones first, but after 3 months of shadowing, he hadn't found a single sign that any of them knew the Specter's true identity. But they had to know. It was impossible for a corruptor to conquer a city without someone finding out. After 3 months, Nick changed tactics. He kidnapped a deeply corrupt peak specialist, put her in darkness, and used his ability to manipulate the nightmare's influence to siphon information out of her. Even after several minutes, he found nothing concrete. She didn't even know who or what gluttony was. Nick killed her and left the city. Getting in and out was never difficult. He retreated to a deep cave, built a greater relay, and contacted Wrath with what he'd found. "The city serves gluttony," Wrath said. "It might not know, but it does." "What do you mean?" "Water Pillar might or might not have one of gluttony's servants. In the end, it doesn't matter. The city is a hub of gluttony and famine. You don't need a servant to create that. Sometimes it just happens. Gluttony's influence doesn't require guidance any more than mine does. If there's war in a city, it's under my influence, even without a servant present. Your job is to remove the influence, not to remove foreign servants, unless doing so is required to finish the job. Do your job or die." Wrath cut the connection. Nick furrowed his brows. So this city might not be ruled by one of gluttony's servants. Maybe nobody knows about the connection because gluttony isn't actively involved. It just happens that the city's primary Specter aligns with its values. He looked at the city from a distance. A gigantic pillar of water stood at its center, absorbing atmospheric moisture and converting it into droplets infused with rich Zephyx, turning water into Zephyx. On its own, that wasn't even bad. It was just a tool. In the hands of a greedy few, though, it caused tremendous suffering. Nick scratched his chin. This would be easier as a liaison. I'd just break apart the elite, force the strongest manufacturers into submission, cap the water pillar's output, tax the rich, jumpstart the economy, and it'd be solved. But I can't appear in public. I have no way to hide that I'm a Specter now. How am I supposed to fix a political problem without any political power? He didn't like the situation. Technically, the city wasn't breaking any of Aegis laws, but Crimson City hadn't been breaking any either. Nick hadn't been sent there because of lawbreaking. He'd been sent to raise Zephyx output using the happiness method he'd developed. He looked again at the poorer citizens' dry skin, water that surely tasted awful. There was real suffering here. What am I even thinking about? His resolve hardened again. People are suffering and Aegis needs Zephyx to resist the Specters. That's what matters. That's the core of what it means to be good, protecting humanity as a whole, being fair to the weak. Humanity must survive, but humans must be able to live too. It doesn't matter what I do as long as I achieve that. Then I'll have done the right thing. Nick turned to Mist and entered the city again. He'd do what a liaison would do, just not legally. The city hadn't yet noticed the peak specialist was dead, and Nick used that. He went to her home, conjured a message, and left. A day later, someone came looking for her, found the message, and delivered it to the city's leaders. The elite erupted almost immediately. Increase availability for the poorest 10% by 10 times, the next poorest 10% by 8 times. Or more people involved in the water industry will be assassinated. The full message ran several pages, but that was the gist. It never mentioned the top 10%, but it was obvious where the poor's water had to come from. The death of a peak specialist was massive news, and the city grew oppressive. The most powerful extractors eyed each other with suspicion. Only someone at their level could have pulled this off. Meetings and accusations flew, but nothing changed. They were still investigating. They would find the killer. 5 days later, a water reseller's owner was killed, the same message left behind. More outrage. 5 days after that, the new owner died. Horror. The third owner barricaded themselves inside the strongest manufacturer's building. 5 days later, found dead there too. The fourth owner, nervous but willing to gamble, immediately halved the water price. 5 days after that, another death. This time the owner of a different water reseller, whose prices had stayed high after the first company cut theirs. Chapter 651. Terrorism is the only way. Ordinary people barely noticed what was happening. All they knew was that water had gotten cheaper. Sadly, that changed nothing for the truly poor. 50 credits and 25 credits were equally out of reach. The elite, meanwhile, were under immense stress. No matter what they did, someone important died every 5 days. They guarded likely targets inside their own headquarters, and still, the deaths continued. Accusations flew until people nearly turned on each other out of panic. Then the governor ordered an extreme measure. Every hero had to be present on the 5th day after the last death. Every potential future victim would sit in a containment unit, guarded by one specialist from each major manufacturer, the 4 watching each other, while the heroes watched each other. Every other specialist had to stay in a single room. Anyone unaccounted for would be executed. If only the governor had demanded this, it never would have happened, but desperation made every manufacturer agree. When the day came, everyone followed the plan. 4 specialists guarded the entrance to the strongest containment unit, holding all the major leaders of the water trade. Every hero and specialist gathered in one room and waited. For an entire day, the city's biggest manufacturers did nothing. That was how serious the threat was. After 24 hours, the heroes left together and went to the containment unit. Dead, all 4 specialists dead. Inside, the water elite huddled against the walls, avoiding the corpse in the middle of the room. On top of it lay a sheet of paper. Make water affordable. Anyone resisting will be executed. If you are not for humanity, you are against humanity. Resistance is equivalent to rejecting humanity and embracing specterdom. The actual message ran longer with detailed policy demands, but that was the gist. A shouting match broke out among the heroes. Every extractor had been accounted for, none of them could be the culprit. So who was it? It had to be a Specter. No human could manage this. Someone with this kind of power would be at least a peak specialist, likely a hero, and someone at that level would be chasing entry into Aegis as an agent, which this kind of terrorism wouldn't help with. So, a Specter. But then what was its goal? What did it gain from cheaper water? It's not about the water, one hero shouted. The water's just a front, it's probably growing stronger by instilling fear in us. That became the consensus, and the heroes finally worked together. They would protect their people. As soon as the water elite left the containment unit, they slashed prices, some even selling at a loss just to survive. The city's biggest manufacturer controlled the water pillar, nearly the only water source in the city, and buying from them had never been cheap. The common people felt like they were living in a dream. Why was water suddenly so cheap? They still spent a good chunk of their income, but now enough to survive without health consequences. Naturally, some semi-rich people bought up the cheap water to resell at a markup. The people realized it had been too good to be true, until the resellers turned up dead, pinned to the tallest buildings with a message plastered across the walls. No reselling. The big water companies immediately capped maximum purchases to prevent it from happening again. They weren't at fault for someone hoarding their stock, but they weren't taking chances either. Water returned to the poor. But the killings didn't stop. An expert from the biggest manufacturer was killed, and this message had the biggest impact yet. The terrorists demanded water stay affordable for sellers too, so they could still turn a profit. Refuse, and the CFO would be killed. The CFO was an initial hero. The manufacturer refused and swore never to leave the CFO's side. The company had 4 heroes, and at least one stayed with him from that day on. The 5th day came. Nobody died, instead a message, "I'm still here." The heroes narrowed their eyes. As long as they stuck together, the assassin couldn't kill them, powerful enough to take down a peak specialist or a group of specialists, but probably not 2 or more heroes at once. Weeks passed. Nobody died, but every 5 days another message confirmed the terrorist was still there. After 3 months, the first water seller took the risk and sold everything, closing the company rather than keep bleeding money. That was different from simply refusing to do business, and sure enough, the gamble paid off. The former owner wasn't killed. Nick had never demanded anyone keep operating at a loss. It was worth remembering that Nick didn't make rich people poor, he capped their income. Wealth in Crimson City still grew under him, just more slowly. He never asked the rich to join the beggars in poverty. They kept their lavish lifestyles, but with more power came more obligation to support the weak. If the water seller had kept their assets and simply refused business, Nick would have killed them. Since they'd sold out entirely and left the market, he left them alone. Once the other water sellers caught on, many followed suit. The water supply shrank dramatically again. The poor suffered again. The rich grew more afraid. The government and manufacturers were flooded with requests to lower water prices. Everyone wanted this over. Nobody wanted to live in fear anymore. While the rich pressured the manufacturers pressured the governor. Call Aegis. They'd been guarding that one CFO for months. How much longer were they supposed to keep it up? The CFO himself lived under constant stress, feeling watched at all times. The city hadn't found the terrorist, and the heroes demanded Aegis step in. What were they even paying taxes for? But the governor refused again and again. He didn't explain why, but it was obvious. Calling Aegis over this would end any hope of becoming an agent. He was supposed to be able to handle things like this himself. And besides, what would he even tell them? That some Specter was trying to lower water prices. Aegis' first move would be to just lower the prices and see what happened. If the killing stopped, the governor would be in serious trouble. Calling Aegis wasn't a small act, and Aegis cared more about solving problems than dispensing justice. The just solution of finding and killing the terrorist would cost more manpower than the city was worth, and Aegis didn't have resources to spare. Lowering water prices was something the governor could do himself. If he couldn't manage even that, there was no point keeping him in Aegis. He'd be demoted to Stronghold Guard or thrown out entirely, never advancing again. How about you just lower the cost of water? The governor asked the CEO controlling the water pillar. The CEO gave a long answer, but in short. No. Chapter 652, Influences. Eventually, the biggest manufacturer compromised. They bought out every remaining water company and sold directly to the market, eliminating the original 100% profit margin and effectively halving the price. Water became more accessible than ever, but 30% of people still couldn't afford it. The next message from the terrorists said this still didn't meet their demands. That pushed the stressed CFO over the edge. He ordered a complete halt to all water sales. The heroes around him warned this was a terrible idea, but he didn't care. He'd lived in fear for months. He was done. Within 5 hours, Nick retaliated. They did what? Bad news kept piling up. First, every console controlling a containment unit housing a demon was destroyed. The units themselves were indestructible to anything weaker than a fallen or protector, but the consoles weren't, and without them, the manufacturers lost all access to their demons. The only one still reachable was the water pillar, too large and non-aggressive to be contained that way. Every manufacturer got hit. And alarms broke out everywhere, containment unit doors opening, fanatics and elders about to be released. Security protocols gave the manufacturers over 3 minutes to stop any release, so nothing actually got out. But the alarms didn't stop. Every few minutes, another unit tried to open. For hours, working with Specters became too risky, and every extractor was put on watch. Yet the release commands kept firing, no matter how closely anyone monitored the consoles. The stress was unbearable. Some unknown power could enter a room, do something horrifying, and leave. The only thing keeping anyone alive was its own disinterest in killing them. The other manufacturers turned on the biggest one and its CFO specifically. They hadn't even sold water. Why were they being dragged into this? The CFO finally relented and reinstated sales. The chaos stopped. No more Specters tried to escape. After a brief moment of relief, the pressure returned. The other manufacturers had had enough. Fulfill the demands, or so help me the champion, I will do something. The CFO, still shaken, was ready to negotiate. He agreed to the demands on the condition that the other manufacturers cover the lost profits. Desperate, they agreed without a second thought. It came to a couple million credits a month, a fortune to an ordinary person, but barely a few hours profit for manufacturers with heroes on staff. They were glad to pay it if it meant the chaos ended. Still, they knew they were getting the raw end of the deal and they wouldn't forget it. As soon as the agreement was signed, the second biggest manufacturer pulled out of the alliance against the terrorist. If the biggest one wanted to act like this, they wouldn't help. The third biggest followed. In the end, only the governor and the biggest manufacturer remained. Hours later, cheap water flooded the city again. Over the following days, nothing happened. No message, no death. A month passed, nothing. Then the biggest manufacturer began raising the price again, slowly. Nothing happened. It rose further, still nothing. Was the terrorist gone? Another 2 weeks passed, it seemed so. The price returned to its original level. The poor lost access again. Still nothing. Another month, the assassin was gone. Finally, they were free. Then reality hit. They'd gotten careless. The CFO was dead, exactly what the terrorist had threatened. The first time he'd been left alone, he was killed. The assassin had never actually left. A message sat on his corpse. If you had kept the price down, you would still be alive. An initial hero dead. Terror swept through the manufacturers again. This thing could kill a hero without being noticed. The water price dropped back to the demanded level immediately. The governor still refused to call Aegis. Then nothing again. Weeks passed, a month, no new message. After 6 months, One of the biggest manufacturers' remaining heroes suggested a small price increase to keep pace with the economy. The other two shut him down instantly. Do not touch the water price. The price stayed put, and just like that, gluttony's influence had been driven from the city. Nick had studied the water pillar and found it was actually a possession specter. Possession specters rarely had any real intelligence, so he doubted it was one of gluttony's servants. Its values simply happened to align with gluttony and famine. As long as things stayed this way, his job here was done. Mostly, Nick spent his time training his Zephyx manipulation and conjuring, checking on the city only every few days. The water issue was resolved, but the city wasn't finished changing. Over the following months, the other manufacturers grew increasingly annoyed at paying for the biggest ones lost water revenue when they'd never been part of the trade. Eventually, they pulled their funding. The biggest manufacturer was livid at the broken agreement and complained to the governor, who deflected. He didn't want any part of it. In the past, he'd have backed the biggest manufacturer without hesitation. But something crucial had changed. One of their heroes, the former CFO, was dead, along with several specialists, including a peak specialist. They'd been hit hardest of anyone. Meanwhile, the second and third biggest manufacturers, united by shared enmity, had grown close enough that a fight between the two sides no longer had an obvious winner. That made the governor the deciding factor. Whichever side he chose would win, and that earned him plenty of new privileges. As long as he stayed neutral, he stayed in control. A full year passed since the CFO's death, and the terrorist never resurfaced. The city was fairly sure it was gone, but nobody dared touch the water price. The terrorist was no longer the focus. The biggest manufacturer's weakness was. The other two wanted to use the opening to push them off their throne, and tensions between the manufacturers kept climbing. Nick watched them slide into open conflict. The second part of his job was more or less done. He'd driven out gluttony's and famine's influence and replaced it with wraths and wars. This city hadn't needed one of Wrath's servants directly, so its influence ran lighter than a city with one present, but it still leaned Wrath's way. A net positive. The influence profit nearly matched the revenue, since there'd been no influence cost. Just to be safe, Nick decided to watch over the city for another year before moving on, to make sure nothing strange happened. Then something very strange happened. While Nick trained outside the city, his ability deactivated. At the same time, the sun grew brighter. Chapter 653, The Sun Shines. The sky brightened, and Nick's ability deactivated. He charged away immediately. A brightening sky didn't necessarily mean something was wrong with the sun itself. It could just as easily be an attack using light as a weapon. In an instant, he turned to mist and dove into a cave, his mist eroding the ground into a hole as he charged downward. Once no light reached him, his ability reactivated, multiplying his speed. After a kilometer underground, he stopped. With his ability active again, nothing could perceive him. If anything tried to follow, he'd see it coming through the tunnel. But nothing came. His perception found nothing either. A moment later, he moved back out and looked around. What is going on? Everything was brighter, the sun's usual gentle orange now searing white. This had never happened before. No history book he'd read ever mentioned it. As far as he knew, the sun had never brightened like this. Looking at the world, Nick felt strange, like he didn't belong in it, like the light itself refused him. It grew harder to breathe, which made no sense since he didn't breathe at all. Still, that was exactly how it felt. He narrowed his eyes, stepped forward, and held a hand into the light. His ability deactivated instantly. He pulled his arm back, it reactivated. That confirmed it. The sun is perceiving the world, Nick thought, which means it's never perceived the world while I've been alive. There was a chance it had perceived me before without deactivating my ability, or that it was a possession specter incapable of perceiving anything at all. Both are false now. The sun is conscious, and it generally ignores the world, until it doesn't. His mind raced. I'm a specter, I should be its ally. He steadied himself and walked outside. The searing light bathed his entire body. The temperature wasn't actually that high. A human would sweat standing in it, but it wasn't dangerous. He looked up at a sky far bluer than usual. Beautiful, and yet his nervousness only grew. He felt like he was drowning. What is going on? He analyzed his own body and found the source of his panic. I stopped producing Zephyx. Why? He tried to force more, but nothing happened. Then he understood. There's no prefix around me. Like any specter, he needed prefix to make Zephyx. Without it, he couldn't produce any. He rushed back into the cave. The moment he left the light, the pressure and panic vanished, and his Zephyx production resumed. What does the light do to prefix? He wondered. Destroy it, isolate it, block it, consume it, stabilize it. Before he could get far analyzing it, something shocking happened. People of Earth. Nick's eyes widened at the voice coming from the sun itself. It was speaking to them. All over the world, people stepped outside and looked up. Specters intelligent enough to understand speech did the same. I am the new champion of light. I am the most powerful human in the world. Nick's mind nearly stopped. A new champion of light. He thought of the kind old man on the throne. What had happened to him? A bad feeling settled in. The old champion of light has passed on. Nick's mind went blank. The old champion gone. He remembered how the old man had given him his new last name and the chance to prove his theory on running cities better. They'd met only once, but it had left a lasting mark. The old champion had been undoubtedly good, selflessly devoted to protecting humanity, and now the most powerful human alive was dead. I hoped I'd see him again, Nick thought. The old champion of light has given me his power so that I may protect you in his stead, the voice continued. Power transfer, Nick thought, that shouldn't be possible. Yet I do not need all of his power, the new champion proclaimed. The bright light you see right now is my gift to you. Hope, look at the sun, see how bright it is. Its light threatens the specters, but for us it is warm. The sun has always protected us from the nightmare and countless other specters. It is not our enemy but our protector. With its power we can defend ourselves. With its power we can reclaim our world. As the champion of light, it is my duty to use the sun's power to destroy the specters. I promise you, I will get rid of them all. It might not happen in your lifetime or your children's, but someday, one of our descendants will live in a world without specters. I, the new champion of light, swear it. Whom? The sun brightened further, and Nick felt his consciousness under attack, a deep, droning pressure reverberating through his entire being, drowning out any coherent thought. Specters, repent. Whom? The light exploded. Nick was thrown against the cave wall hard enough to destroy it. The light dimmed again, only slightly brighter than usual. Remember my words, people of Earth. I will save you. Believe in me. Then the light returned to its normal brightness, dim and dark by comparison, a constant dark orange. Nick didn't notice any of that. The last attack had knocked him unconscious, throwing all his Zephyx into disorder, distorted and senseless. It took nearly a full minute for his body to recover. His eyes opened, memories flooding back. He jumped to his feet and looked outside. Everything's back to normal. He watched the world for a while before stepping out of the cave. Everything's back to normal, he confirmed, feeling the Zephyx his body generated again. The way the new champion spoke means the light probably only affects specters. Normal humans shouldn't suffer from it at all. For a long time, Nick stayed silent, trying to make sense of it all. A new champion of light, the old one dead. Meanwhile, far away, a man shining in golden light bowed before a golden throne. On it sat an ancient man, eyes closed as if sleeping. He wasn't. The left arm looked at him and saw his final expression, regret. This was not the face of someone who had died peacefully of old age. The shining man straightened and swept his arm aside. The old man on the throne crumbled into white dust and vanished. The shining man turned, drew a long, bright sword and shouted, "For humanity." The 6 shields in the hall raised their arms. "For humanity," they echoed. And yet their shouts didn't sound very heartfelt. Chapter 654, So Many Inconsistencies. Nick wasn't sure what this change meant for the world. He only knew it was monumental. First, I should check the city and see how people react. He moved quickly toward Water Pillar City. The streets were full of people, eyes bright with excitement. Nick's perception swept across a huge portion of the city, catching countless overlapping conversations. A normal person would be overwhelmed by the noise. But as a specialist, his mind could track more than 10 conversations at once, filtering them out of a sea of 1,000. They're excited, he thought. Many think they're dreaming. Others have found new belief in the old tale of the champion of light. Something interesting caught his attention. The city had captured over 5 specters in the last few minutes. When the new champion shouted for specters to repent, the power of the sun had struck all of them, not just Nick, thrown back and knocked unconscious, just like him. Not all of them, though. Nick doubted the new champion had enough power to injure a fallen while spreading his attack across such a wide area. Demons had probably only been pushed back a little, undamaged. But everything weaker had been exposed. That was staggering. 5 hidden specters in one city was low, by most standards. Most cities probably held over 15. Water Pillar City had a better grip on its specter problem than average, with 7 heroes and over 50 specialists. even after Nick had weakened it considerably. The new champion hit 5 Specters here, and probably more elsewhere. The Great Triangle alone has around 300 cities, a bit more than 3 million people. Only the Grand Continent has more, though not by much. The whole world probably has barely 1,000 cities, something like 10 million people. With one move, he's probably exposed over 5,000 Specters. The number of lives he saved is staggering, more in one moment than I've managed in decades. Nick narrowed his eyes at a group of Extractors nearby, listening to their exhilarated chatter. And that's not even everything. The light that stopped my Zephyx production apparently had the opposite effect on Extractors. From what he overheard, the brief moment of sunlight had filled every human present with Zephyx, meaning nobody needed a Specter's help to advance today. They'd already gotten what they needed. Light had also let people push through bottlenecks early. Nick himself had always had to force his way through at around 80% of the Zephyx required for the next level, a trick he'd learned from Mainla back when he was a newbie. The champion's light let people advance at barely 50%. Around 30% of the city had leveled up today alone, though it hadn't helped with reaching Zephysis, forming a shell, or getting through the consumption. Still terrifying, it had even worked on heroes. Water Pillar City now had 3 early heroes. The champion of light had done so much good in a single day. Humanity should be thrilled to have him. And yet Nick didn't like it. All of this is good, beneficial for humanity, but I can't be sure of his actual goals. Some things are deeply worrying. First, why did the old champion die already? He should have had decades left. Second, how did he transmit his power at all? That shouldn't be easily achievable. There are too many hoops to jump through. I've spent years with the technician, and I'm certain neither our technology nor Zephology is anywhere near capable of something this miraculous. Third, the amount of Zephyx needed to push back thousands of Specters and advance tens of thousands of Extractors is absurd. Only an Eternal could manage anything close to that kind of power, and even if the old champion converted his entire life into Zephyx for one ability, it wouldn't be enough. And using an ability like that would require access the champion shouldn't even have. He was just a mid-shield. Not even death can hold the entire world in his mind. I've been in and out of Aegis headquarters enough times to know death's perception only covers a circle about 500 kilometers wide. Death should be a peak adversary. I don't think either champion could encompass the whole world like this. Lastly, the new champion called the sun our ally. Nick narrowed his eyes, and taking that together with everything else unexplainable, it actually makes sense. If the sun helped, all of this becomes possible. It's likely the strongest Specter in existence, and since it's always perfectly centered above everyone's head, its perception probably stretches across the entire planet too. Either the champion used it as a tool, or it helped him voluntarily. A thought struck him. When my ability deactivated, was that the champion looking at me or the sun? He turned it over for a while. I can't tell. The answer would tell me the relationship between them, but there's no way to find out. Still, one thing is certain. Somehow, the sun and the champion of light work together, if only for a moment. Nick's brows furrowed. But isn't killing the sun the very thing that would free humanity? Isn't that Aegis' entire goal? Why is it suddenly an ally? There are too many strange things going on. Too many things that don't make sense. Speaking of, where did this guy even come from? Sure, I'm not high in Aegis hierarchy, but there wasn't even a whisper of his existence. The sun should be the strongest Specter, and Specters grow stronger by causing suffering. Shouldn't the strongest Specter have caused the most suffering of all? Shouldn't it be the very symbol of humanity's suppression? This should be the last thing humanity would ally with. So why is the champion suddenly calling it one? If it really were an ally, it could just kill the other Eternals outright, or at least the adversaries. It has the power to save humanity and isn't using it. Something doesn't add up. He looked up toward the sun. Nobody except the champion of light has ever received its ability. If the new champion also has it, only 2 people in history have ever gotten it, and both became the most powerful humans alive. But abilities go to new Extractors. What are the odds both of them happen to receive it and both happen to become the strongest humans on Earth? Speaking of, how did the old champion even become so powerful? History just says he suddenly appeared before creating Aegis, already the strongest human alive. No eyewitness accounts of his rise. Nobody knows what city he came from. Were there even cities like ours over 2,000 years ago? It's almost like the sun chooses its champion. Nick rubbed the side of his head. But that doesn't add up either. The old champion was genuinely good, I could feel it. He looked at me with real care and hope. He genuinely wanted to help humanity. Why would the sun choose someone like that? Why did it choose him at all? All of this Suddenly, Nick felt his ability deactivate, and he shot into the ground. Nick! He stopped moving. He knew that voice. How was he here? Chapter 655, Changing Fronts. Nick came out of the ground and looked around in shock. Technician. But how? He can't leave Aegis headquarters. If he does, Death will attack it. Wow, so you really became a Specter. That's fascinating. A voice spoke in Nick's mind. Yes, did you get my message? Sure did, the voice answered, laughing. Then the atmosphere shifted. Has your goal changed? The technician asked. Never mind, stupid question, he cut in. Even if it did, you wouldn't tell me. You know how that go. Forget it. Listen, I don't have much time. I'm just flying through here coincidentally. Well, not really. I knew you had to be around somewhere, but I'm actually doing something else entirely. Anyway, stay away from Aegis for a couple of years. A lot is happening and I can't get into it. Just lie low, go undercover, whatever. Time's up, gotta go. A moment later, Nick's ability reactivated. He hadn't even seen a glimpse of the technician. He'd probably just flown past in a straight line without appearing to talk to anyone. Nick grew more nervous. That means he thinks he's being watched and that whoever's watching wouldn't be happy about me existing, which shields even know about me. The left arm, the technician, the old champion of light, those three for certain. What about the other four? What about the new champion? He narrowed his eyes. The technician specifically traveled through here to warn me. Things at Aegis must be chaotic. I can't assume everyone there is my ally right now. My original message should have gone straight to the left arm, and since the technician knows about it, the two of them are probably aligned, meaning she's likely still on my side. But I can't be sure about the rest. Being a former human might make me more dangerous to them than an ordinary Specter. I have to guard my true identity. He imitated a deep breath. In the end, nothing's really changed. All of this is too big for me to influence. I just have to keep doing what I've been doing, maybe push back my return to Aegis by a few years, and be more careful about how I do it. He turned to look at Water Pillar City. I'll watch it for a few more months, then call Wrath and move to the next city. The matter of the sun had passed, and Nick returned to his work as Wrath's agent. He wasn't powerful enough yet to get involved in events this large. Over the following months, plenty changed on a global scale, though ordinary people never heard a whisper of it. For them, nothing had changed. The biggest effects were subtle, but Nick did learn of one shift. Your next goal is lust, Wrath said through gritted teeth. Lust, Nick raised an eyebrow. I thought we were going after gluttony. Things have changed. What's changed? Wrath glared at him for a moment. The humans are pressuring pestilence in the north of the Grand Continent. Nick kept his expression still, though he was genuinely surprised. Humanity, pressuring one of the trio of destruction. That explains where the technician was actually headed. I'm near the western part of the continent. If someone from Aegis headquarters took the longer eastern route, they'd pass right by me. He's probably fighting near the front line against pestilence. Sloth and Lust retreated north to help pestilence. That leaves Lust's position open. We're using the opening to expand my territory east, Wrath explained. Nick nodded. Technically, none of the corruptors got directly involved in their own territories. A powerful Fallen showing itself risked a devastating human counterattack. They worked through major relays instead, though even those carried risk. There were ways to intercept and track a relay's messages, though it wasn't easy. Only a protector could hope to manage it, and only if positioned close to one of the two parties. A major relay worked by establishing a connection to a corruptor. The manipulation lines only granted access to its power, not the connection itself, which the corruptor maintained on its own end. The relay sent a request. The corruptor answered. The two sides could then talk, but a powerful protector nearby could tap the connection and triangulate both positions. In battles at this scale, intel and location mattered more than anything. Both sides usually only knew the other's rough whereabouts, reveal a precise location, and the enemy could strike it with everything they had. He just knew pestilence lurked somewhere in the northeast, narrowed down to roughly a 2,000-kilometer square, attack blindly, and pestilence would see the attacker coming and retaliate devastatingly. The moment either side revealed itself, the final battle would begin, ending in one side's death. So the shields stationed in the north stayed silent, just as pestilence, Lust, and Sloth did. That silence meant Lust couldn't reach its own cities either. Contact would give away its position, and Aegis would strike. Being cut off from their cities like this was a serious blow to the corruptors. Only Envy could ignore the risk entirely, since Aegis already knew its location. But Envy was different, hidden in an area of absolute darkness, and wielding hundreds of distinct abilities, the widest range of any Specter in existence. It had countless ways to snuff out light and blanket extractors in darkness, and even all of Aegis combined couldn't withstand the nightmare's power. Neither side gained anything from escalating that particular standoff. Attacking Envy was too risky for Aegis, and leaving the Dark Crater was too risky for Envy, since it would lose its home advantage. The two sides remained locked in permanent stalemate over the desolate continent. The only way to end it for good would be if the Champion of Light went there in person, immune to the nightmare's influence as the living embodiment of sunlight. But if he left, death would raze Aegis headquarters to the ground. Countless other things were happening across the world. Shields relocating opened doors for neutral adversaries in Fallen, while pride and wrath grew bolder. Nick heard about none of it, only the siege of Pestilence touched his life, for now. Wrath gave him his new target, over 2,000 kilometers to the southeast, far from where he currently stood. Nick recognized the region, the Ant region, named for the staggering number of residential ruins scattered across it, as if it had once held an impossible number of humans. Historians estimated over 2 billion people had once lived in that triangular stretch at the continent's southern edge, against a current world population barely reaching 10 million. The thought of 2 billion people crammed into so small a space was as disturbing as it was hard to imagine. The population density must have rivaled an anthill, which was how the region got its name. The Ant region and the territory northeast of it were where lust held its strongest grip, unsurprising, given how many people had once lived and procreated there. This was where lust reigned. Chapter 656, Meat Cube City. The first city Nick reached was Meat Cube City, named for its most powerful specter, the meat cube, which grew stronger by absorbing meat, regardless of where that meat came from. There were different ways a city could work with such a specter. Handled like the corpse mountain in Crimson City, feeding it the dead, it wouldn't be so bad. But this was a city under lust's control, and it didn't take much imagination to guess how lust and meat production connected. On the surface, Meat Cube City looked like any other. Underneath, its darkness ran deep. Aegis tolerated starvation and dehydration as long as tribute kept flowing, but if it learned what was truly happening here, it would replace the local government immediately. The city held around 9,000 people, roughly 4,500 women, 2,500 of them adults, and 1,500 of those currently pregnant. 60% of all adult women in the city, pregnant at once. From the outside, it looked like a city on the verge of a population boom. The future looked bright. Didn't it? It wasn't. Living here was expensive, but most women lived quite well, a byproduct of their high social status, since women alone could grow meat that didn't cause irreparable harm when removed properly. Men couldn't produce it. Technically, donating meat to the biggest manufacturer was illegal on ethical grounds. The guards ignored the law entirely. They weren't meant to care. About 7 months after conception, a meat donor would visit the biggest manufacturer and meet a specter that grew stronger by ending pregnancies. 7 months was the sweet spot, big enough to be valuable, small enough to remove without endangering the donor. Once the growing life had been ended, the donor would go to the meat remover, who compressed the donation into a long stick for safe, easy extraction. The donation went into the meat cube, and the donor received a handsome reward. Women in the city enjoyed real amenities, regular baths, no hunger, a good home, no need for a job. But only the ones who secretly donated could afford that life. Most men ranked below them, working brutal hours for a worse standard of living. These roughly 3,000 adult men effectively did nearly all the labor for all 9,000 people in the city, and still weren't at the bottom. That spot belonged to women who refused to donate. Like the men, they had to work hard, but biology meant only the strongest could keep pace with the physical toll, and most were treated like dirt by the men, many of whom resented the donor's ability to print money, seeing their self-destructive choice as proof of stupidity rather than desperation. Of course, plenty of men saw it the opposite way, viewing the refusers as noble and the donors as monsters. Generalizations cut both ways. Despite all this, having a child and keeping it was nearly impossible for the poor. Too many men were willing to steal some meat from expectant parents, and most of the poor refused to procreate at all rather than risk it. Still, these were minor complaints in a city whose population was, relatively speaking, fairly happy, almost 50% living in comfort, another 30% doing fine. Nowhere near as bad as Black Mine City or Water Pillar City. That was only true, of course, if you counted only the living. As for the suffering of the sacrificed meat, well, there was a reason the city guarded this secret so fiercely. It produced an enormous amount of Zephyx this way, and the governor's reputation was stellar. It was only a matter of time before Aegis called him in to become an agent. He delivered 40% more Zephyx than the required minimum, largely to keep Aegis from ever sending someone to look at and optimize things here. When Nick saw what was happening, he grew furious. He always did entering a new city, but this time his anger stretched over more people than usual. Normally it's centered on a few hundred elite. Here it reached over 3,000. I don't care how strongly society incentivizes this, he thought coldly. You have your own mind, your own hands, your own will. He remembered the bad things he'd done under Wintour's and Julian's orders, and his anger deepened. He hadn't needed to do those things either, and yet he had. Yes, I'm a monster. That doesn't make you any less one. He studied the city's biggest manufacturers and its governor, then began his infiltration. He'd gotten good at this by now. Over the first few days, he gathered intel. The city produced above-average Zephyx but ran below average in extractor strength. The biggest manufacturer held a near monopoly, with the second biggest fielding only 3 experts and no specialists at all. The biggest manufacturer had just 2 heroes, both early, and surprisingly fewer than 10 specialists, with very few fanatics under its command. This was a city that leaned entirely on the meat cube, rare since most cities had backups. If the Crimson Fungus in Crimson City had suddenly died, the city would still have had the Plague Eagle and nearly 20 fanatics to fall back on. Output would drop, but tribute could still be paid if with less luxury. Here, if the meat cube died, the entire economy would collapse. Over 60% of the city's Zephyx came from it alone. The governor himself was only an early hero, formerly the CZE of the biggest manufacturer. The previous governor had died to Specter, and Aegis, never learning the truth, simply installed a replacement. Back then there had still been 2 major manufacturers that changed fast once the new governor took over, reshaping the city into what it was today. With all that learned, Nick went looking for Lust's agent Crucial, since dealing with Lust's influence while its emissary survived would just let the city revert. After 2 months of shadowing every important figure, he confirmed it. The Specter that grew stronger by killing unborn babies. Just like in Black Mine City, that Specter controlled the meat cube directly. Surprisingly, the meat cube wasn't a possession Specter, but a physical Specter with the intelligence of a fairly dumb mammal, domesticated by Lust and ordered to obey the other Specter. Similar to Black Mine City, except here both Specters were publicly known, hiding in plain sight. And the governor was in on it too, working alongside Lust's emissary rather than against it, unlike his counterpart in Black Mine City. With all of this understood, Nick settled on a simple plan. Dealing with it would be easy enough. Chapter 657, Meat Cube. A full year passed. Meat Cube City didn't change at all, everything stayed exactly as it was. Today, Nick looked at the city with a determined expression. Finally, took long enough. He looked at his right hand and clenched it, feeling the power in it. I should be around 59 or 60 by now. Becoming a mid-specialist at that age counts as very young. He wanted to exhale. Or mid-fanatic, I suppose. Being a Specter is exactly why I'm advancing this fast. If I were still human, even consuming a late elder, I'd need 5 to 10 years per level. I've gained 2 levels in 5 years faster than when I first became an expert. Advancement usually slows with power, but not for me. He furrowed his brows. Though it is slowing, the first level took 2 years, the second took 3. His growth looked incredible on paper, caused suffering somewhere, and he kept advancing without lifting a finger. But it wouldn't last forever. He still drew suffering from Marcus Julius, but the rich and powerful of Crimson City had stopped suffering long ago, settled into their new lives, their grief mostly spent. Nick barely gained anything from that city anymore. Black Mine City's contribution was shrinking too. Water Pillar City, still mid-transformation, gave him the most right now, but he knew Black Mines would nearly vanish within 10 years, and Water Pillars would drop significantly too. He was advancing quickly but at the cost of real suffering. The Zephyx I need will only grow as I get stronger, and I have to keep at it. But I have to remember I live to help humanity, not to profit from its pain. If I put my own power first, I'm no better than the rich people I hate. I have to be careful. He turned his attention back to the city. As a mid-fanatic, I should be strong enough. He seemingly vanished, in truth, partially transformed into mist. Years spent mastering Zephyx manipulation had given him enough control to shift the color of his mist and partially transform his body, letting him travel through open air without needing to become a demon or activate his primary ability. By turning the tips of his hands and feet into mist, he expanded their surface area, letting him push off the air itself like a lizard skating across water. Not a perfect comparison, but close enough. He could use any part of the sky like a road now. Partially misted, He entered Meat Cube City and moved rapidly through its streets until he reached a towering skyscraper, Geometry, the city's most powerful manufacturer. He slipped past the guards without issue. Nobody paid him much attention. Why would they? Geometry was the undisputed power in the city. No human would dare attack them, and Specters tended to avoid concentrations of strong extractors. He rode the extractor shaft to one of the higher floors, empty except for a large door at the end of a long hallway, the floor housing the meat cube. He'd watched this floor for weeks. Meat deliveries happened once daily in the evening. Right now it was afternoon. He waited in the hallway for hours until someone finally emerged from the shaft, one of Geometry's two heroes. A different hero delivered the meat each day, splitting the meat cube's Zephyx roughly evenly. 2 days each per week for the heroes, 3 for the governor. Nick watched the hero open the containment unit, his perception slipping inside to study the meat cube itself, about 2 meters to a side, surprisingly solid. One might expect a literal cube of meat to look bloody, but it didn't. It looked almost crusted over. When the door opened, it didn't move at all. Neither hero even knew it was a physical specter. They believed it an early demon possession specter. Only the governor knew the truth. The meat cube was actually a mid-physical demon. Lucky for him, the heroes would never find out. Eventually they'd become mid-heroes, come to Aegis' attention, and get assigned to govern cities of their own. Nick slipped into the containment unit behind the hero. The place was filthy, blood and scraps of meat everywhere. If the hero had been paying attention, he might have noticed Nick. He didn't. He'd made this trip twice a week for decades. Staying vigilant here was like staying vigilant on a trip to the bathroom. As for the meat cube, it had been ordered to act like a possession specter, so it did. Specters rarely felt boredom or frustration except when insane, so it simply existed in a dormant, half-thinking state. Smart enough, given it had spent decades this way and kept receiving meat regardless. It waited for further orders. The hero dumped his delivery into the meat cube. A moment later, the meat began to absorb, releasing a wave of Zephyx. He spent the next hour absorbing it, then left. Nick waited. He was watching for something specific, and he stayed in that containment unit for over 2 weeks, watching a different deliverer arrive each day. Then 2 weeks in, it finally happened. 2 people entered together this time. One was a middle-aged man with a casual expression, wearing the spotless uniform of a governor, the governor himself. The other was a young woman, barely dressed, with impressive breasts covered by a thin strip of fabric and red heels that looked nearly impossible to walk in. A very unusual outfit for a woman in these parts, but then she wasn't really a woman. She was a specter, and Lust's emissary, the one who could command the meat cube. When Nick saw them, he knew the time had come. This was what he'd been waiting for. About once a month, the governor secretly brought Lust's emissary to the meat cube, her own order. She was only an early fanatic and knew she couldn't win a fight against the governor, and since he was human, prone to occasional illogical decisions, she'd given the meat cube a failsafe. If it didn't see her at least once every 2 months, it was to kill the governor and level the city. So every month, without fail, he brought her here, a standing reminder of who was truly in charge. As the Specter entered, the meat cube's consciousness stirred and reached out to her. "Show me your Specter core," she ordered, Nick's doing, working through the meat cube's trained obedience. It complied without question, its core slowly pushing out of its shell. Both the emissary and the governor watched in confusion. Why show its core now? Bang! A spear struck it, and an instant later it shattered. The meat cube was dead. Chapter 658, You Are Alone. The meat cube's Specter core exploded, and its body began crumbling into black dust. The governor pulled out 2 huge shields and spun, scanning the room. The emissary hadn't even registered the meat cube's death before he was already moving. Bang! One shield snapped into place beside her, just in time to block another spear. Nick's brows furrowed. He'd thrown the second spear immediately after the first, counting on his speed to catch the emissary off guard while the governor stood frozen in shock. That had been the plan. Instead, the governor had reacted immediately and cleanly, no rust in his instincts, meaning he'd seen real battles before. Geometry's dominance meant little conflict now, but nobody started at the top. The governor was the one who'd pushed it there in the first place. The moment the 2 shields appeared, Nick knew. A bruiser. He'd never seen the governor fight since the man never carried visible weapons, a space bag apparently. Quite the luxury. Nick had expected to kill the emissary quickly, but the governor's block ruined that. Only now did she register what was happening and look to her left, where a metal blade extended out of the meat cubes, dispersing black smoke. Bang! Blocked by another shield, the governor narrowed his eyes and punched forward with it. Whoom! The meat cube scattered into black mist across the whole containment unit. He stretched his arms out, and thousands of silk threads shot from his shields, sticking to every wall, the ceiling, the floor, then, with a sharp gesture, clumped together into a dense, suffocating net. A manipulator, too, controlling the whole battlefield. There was barely room left for a human to move. "You are not my target," a distorted voice said in his ear. He only narrowed his eyes further. That was when the emissary finally reacted, a red glow rising around her. A full level below the governor meant her speed and reactions ran 10 times slower than his, which was exactly why he'd already accomplished this much before she'd done anything at all. It also explained why she'd relied on the meat cube as a threat in the first place. The power gap between them was enormous. "The meat cube is dead," the Specter said, expression flat. "I must ask Mistress Lust for a new demon. Protect me, and there may be a future for you in this city." The governor kept scanning his surroundings, brows furrowed. "This city belongs to Lord Wrath now," a voice said inside both their heads. His eyes narrowed further, nerves fraying. He hadn't had time to consider the implications of the meat cube's death. Every part of him had been focused on surviving this fight, not on the assassin's identity. He'd assumed all along that he simply couldn't resist someone as powerful as Mistress Lust, a peak fallen. But hearing Lord Wrath changed things, also one of the 7 corruptors, also a peak fallen. This was a war between 2 peak fallen, and someone like him had no power to sway a conflict at that scale. "Wrath has no power over this city," the emissary said coldly. "The sin of lust runs too deep here. Trying to convert it is a wasted effort." The black mist spun rapidly, and a blade shot out. Bang! Blocked by another of the governor's shields. He glanced around, his net hadn't triggered once. Whatever this thing was, it was extraordinarily good at avoiding it. "You are alone," the voice said. "Why do you think I'm here instead of in the west? You can't reach Lust. You're on your own." While Nick and the emissary traded words, the governor kept searching for the attacker, growing more shocked by the second. How could anything hide in this room, barely large enough for people of their level, and now filled wall to wall with silk? Then a horrifying thought, the black mist. What if the Specter was the mist itself? But how? He'd never even heard of a sapient force Specter. Force Specters barely had the intelligence of a dumb animal. Most acted like single-celled organisms, or forces of nature, running on the barest instincts. How could one possibly speak like a person? Realizing this, the governor understood he was in real trouble. He was a bruiser and a manipulator, not a suppressor, and fighting a force Specter without suppressor abilities was like fighting air. Even if it couldn't hurt him, he couldn't hurt it either. He scrambled for a plan. One of the other heroes was a powerful suppressor, capable of handling this. But how could he get that hero's help without exposing everything? The emissary was the whole problem. Why was the governor protecting some random fanatic? Why was he under attack by an intelligent force Specter in the middle of Geometry's own headquarters? Why had it killed the meat cube at all, when Specters had no reason to fight each other? Answering any of those questions meant revealing her as Lust's emissary, which would only invite more questions about how he knew her and why he was protecting her. If he could get her back into her own containment unit, he could pretend none of this had happened. But Wrath's emissary would keep attacking her regardless, and the instant they stepped outside, the first blocked attack would shake the building and alert half the city. The only reason nobody had noticed yet was the strength of this particular containment unit, built to hold even a peak demon. "You depend on Lord Wrath," the governor suddenly heard in his mind. "Choosing lust is choosing death." Only now did the exchange between the two sides fully register. He'd been too distracted planning to follow it closely. "Lust can't help you," Nick added. "Lust is occupied." The governor hesitated. "Explain," the first thing he'd said since the assault began. "He is lying," the emissary said calmly. "Doesn't matter if I'm lying. The truth comes out either way," the black mist answered. "Lust is occupied. Aegis shields are assaulting Pestilence in the north. Lust and Sloth are there helping. Contacting their servants means exposing their location to Aegis. Their survival matters more than every city they control combined. Lust's emissary can try reaching her. She won't answer. Lord Wrath, meanwhile, is in no danger." The governor's nerves worsened. Normally, betting on Lust would still be the smarter play, given their long partnership, but if she was truly unreachable. He thought of the meat cube's death again, and his nerves worsened further. "Mistress Lust is with us," the emissary said. "He is lying." "You're free to verify," Nick said to the governor. "I've killed the meat cube. If you want this city to survive, you need a new demon. Lust owes you one regardless. Go outside and contact her. I won't attack you and I won't expose your secret. When you realize you're alone, you'll be begging Lord Wrath to save you. The black mist fell silent, the storm inside the room settling into calm, ordinary fog. The governor's brows stayed furrowed. After a few seconds he looked at the emissary. She looked back calm. "Call Mistress Lust," he said. Chapter 659, Bluff. "You do know this is a trap, right?" the emissary asked coldly. "The moment we leave, he'll attack us, and I can't call Mistress Lust from in here." The governor's brows furrowed. "What do you suggest? I'm not a suppressor and you're not strong enough. Give me an alternative." She was quiet for a moment. "There's no such thing as an intelligent force Specter. He's run out of power and is hiding somewhere in here. He wants us to leave so we don't find him." "He has no physical body," the governor said. "I covered the entire room in web and he could still reach you." "Then why did he stop? If he kept attacking, it would be far more convincing. There's no reason to let up just to bait us into leaving." The governor scanned the mist filling the room again, thoroughly this time. Nothing. "He's a force Specter," he said. "I've checked everywhere. This is a containment unit. There's nowhere for him to hide. Leaving is our only option." She didn't respond. In truth, she was right. If Nick could attack, he would have. The distinction mattered. Seeing something wasn't the same as perceiving it. When the governor first scanned the room after Nick's opening attack, he'd seen Nick, technically, but hadn't perceived him. He'd assumed the black mist was just the meat cube's dissipating remains. Nick's ability had stayed active the whole time. But the instant the governor seriously considered that the mist might be a force Specter, Nick's ability deactivated. Because now the governor was perceiving the mist as Nick, exactly what Nick currently was. If Nick attacked now, he'd be far slower and weaker, and the governor could counter and destroy his physical body outright. Worse, both of them would immediately realize how much weaker he'd become. Even without the governor here, killing the emissary now would be difficult. So Nick didn't attack. He was bluffing. "We have to leave," the governor said, falling for it. Though that didn't make him wrong. The meat cube really was dead, and the city really did need a new demon. Nick hadn't lied about Lust. By taking the bluff, the governor was actually improving his odds of survival. "Fine," the emissary said. The two of them crept to the door and the governor opened it. The mist drifted past them as he kept careful watch. All three left the containment unit and the door swung shut. "Where is your major relay?" the mist asked. "Outside the city," she said calmly. The governor's brows furrowed. "I've never escorted you outside." "I don't need you to leave the city. I need you to go into the meat cube's containment unit." He eyed her with suspicion, but followed as she began sneaking through the building's halls and doors. She moved quickly but clumsily, clearly unused to sneaking anywhere. Nick could tell immediately. He'd snuck into enough places to recognize someone with no practice at it. The governor followed, brows furrowed, having already lost track of the mist entirely. As soon as Nick left the containment unit, staying out of sight and reactivating his ability had been easy. He didn't attack her, though. He didn't need to. He was already in the right. She made it out of the building with a few close calls, then slipped past the city walls, just as the governor moved to follow her out. Boom! Something exploded between them. Every eye nearby turned toward the blast, several landing on the governor. His eyes narrowed. That confirmed it. If he charged after the Specter now, he'd look like he already knew who she was. Every powerful extractor here would recognize what kind of Specter this was and immediately wonder how she'd escaped, and why he hadn't stopped her sooner. Acknowledging her now meant becoming a suspect. So he had to act as though he'd only arrived because of the explosion, with no idea she'd been just outside the city. Maybe there was a clever lie to tell, but coming up with an airtight one in a split second felt too risky. I should have prepared a lie for exactly this scenario, he thought, frustrated with himself. He was usually meticulous, but he was still human, and humans slipped into denial when something unforeseen and horrible happened. He'd known she might try to escape, but hadn't truly prepared for her to actually do it. Accepting that possibility meant accepting the meat cube was dead and his connection to Mistress Lust severed, a terrifying thought, given how tightly his life was bound to her. "What happened here?" he demanded of the people around him. "Sir, we don't know," a guard shouted, staring at the wrecked building. "Find the cause," the governor ordered, and extractors scattered in every direction. "I dealt with her," a voice said in his ear. "Come meet your new lord." The governor's brows furrowed as he looked southeast. Something was calling him there, Nick, of course. He took to the sky and flew out of the city, unremarkable enough with everyone already searching for the explosion's cause. Unnoticed, he slipped into a lonely cave, and his eyes widened. Someone stood in front of him, holding the emissary's dissolving head in one hand. Nick. The governor could feel his power now, and it was shockingly weak, at most a peak fanatic, more likely late. Strong, certainly, but the governor was a hero, and he'd thought this thing was a force Specter. Nick dropped the head and burst into mist. The governor braced for a fight, but a moment later Nick reformed into his ordinary body. The governor had never seen anything like it, a Specter switching between physical and force forms. That shouldn't even be possible. Right now, he had the power to kill Nick outright. Without his ability active, Nick couldn't have reacted in time to stop him. It didn't matter. The governor wanted to survive, and Nick was his only path to that. Without a patron stronger than himself, Meat Cube City would collapse, Aegis would send an investigator, his ties to lust would surface, and he'd be executed. He needed a backer. He took a deep breath. "I will follow Lord Wrath," he said respectfully. "Smart," Nick said, gesturing to the major relay at the back of the cave. The governor stepped forward. The relay activated on its own, and Wrath's furious silhouette materialized before him. He bowed. "Lord Wrath." Wrath glared at him with open hatred. "You are mine," he said coldly. "I am yours." Wrath turned to Nick. "What do you need?" He'd taken note of how well Nick did his job, fewer than 10 years, and already several cities conquered. Only a handful of Wrath's fallen servants matched that kind of efficiency. Wrath no longer bothered deciding what to do with a city once Nick was involved. He simply let Nick decide. "I need a demon that wants blood," Nick said. "Do we have one?" Wrath's eyes narrowed. "I have a fitting one." Chapter 660, 10 years. The next day, the governor made a big announcement. The meat cube had been exchanged. The city erupted. Exchanged? How? Why? The other two heroes were livid, though the governor's explanation calmed them somewhat. Working with the meat cube had always been risky. One Aegis investigator and they'd all be punished. It had gone well so far, but sooner or later they'd be found out. Relying on it forever was too dangerous, especially if Aegis policy shifted, or it started investigating cities with suspiciously high Zephyx output. The heroes didn't fully buy it, but when the governor showed them the database entry about the liaison position, they came around. Something big seemed to be shifting inside Aegis, especially with a new champion of light in the picture. Still, they resented not being consulted before their Specter was simply swapped out. It was their Specter, not his. In the end, the governor spun a story. There hadn't been time to ask, and they wouldn't have agreed anyway. This had been for their own good. The heroes stayed furious and insulted, but not enough to fight him over it. They just hoped the replacement wasn't a nightmare. Introduced the new Specter and showed them how it worked. Too large to fit inside a containment unit, it lived in a massive hole beneath the wasteland sand outside the city, nearly 50 meters wide and deep, its brick walls oozing blood like some ancient well. The governor cut his wrist and let the blood flow in. A moment later, a burst of Zephyx surged out of the opening, and the two heroes stared in shock. That was a huge amount, but how would they even capture it? That problem had already been solved. Most of the Zephyx drifted toward the metal plate they stood on and was absorbed there. The governor showed them how to open its side panel and retrieve it. "A mid-demon possession Specter," he explained. "Similar to the meat cube, but since it feeds on blood instead of meat, we don't have to hide our real Zephyx output from Aegis." The two heroes lit up, already planning how to work with it. While they planned, the governor glanced beside the plate. To his eyes, there was no well at all, just a small red leech resting in front of it. This was the illusion leech, capable of powerful illusions, and a physical Specter rather than a possession Specter. It stood there completely of its own free will, unsuppressed. Wrath's servant. Nick already had a plan for redesigning the city, and the leech would handle most of it. First, access would go public. Anyone could come donate blood. As people did, the leech would nudge them into splitting into rival camps. One might believe everyone owed a fixed blood quota, pooled and redistributed to those in need. Another might insist donations were personal, with no obligation to share. Others might raise large families purely to donate more, while others rejected the idea outright. The leech would decide the exact fault lines. Nick barely needed to get involved. In past cities, he'd had to engineer the conflict himself, but here the leech handled everything. He stayed only a few more weeks before leaving. He wasn't needed anymore. The next city was ordinary enough, much like Crimson City, where the dominant Specter barely touched everyday life, growing stronger simply by absorbing corpses, human and otherwise, which made corpses quite valuable. The city sat surrounded by fields of all food, constantly grazed by a domesticated armored slug that ate and grew rapidly. Surprisingly, the slug wasn't a Specter or even a Specter's minion. It was a genuine animal. though one originally engineered by a Specter. A minion remained an extension of its creator's will. These slugs had none of that, behaving as true animals in every respect except two. They couldn't reproduce, and less than 5% of their bodies were edible. Specter supposedly grew powerful simply by creating slugs that consumed food, or so everyone believed. In truth, its real power source and lust's true grip on the city was subtler. The slug's slime acted as a slow-building aphrodisiac. It had no immediate effect, but prolonged exposure significantly heightened libido. The city looked mostly normal, but its population of sex workers and casual sexual favors ran unusually high. Combined with its size, this made it one of the largest cities Nick had ever encountered, over 25,000 people. It took him only 18 months to deal with it. He removed the Specter and imported cattle from another city. This time, the governor had no ties to lust at all, and Nick avoided contact entirely, simply feeding the man useful pieces of news. He seeded conflict through a Specter that demanded territory, which the city conveniently stumbled onto by luck. The next city was pure depravity, lust's influence barely hidden at all. Its dominant Specter grew stronger from non-consensual sex. The more painful and traumatic, the more Zephyx it produced. People here were regularly traumatized, probably one of Nurse Alice's busiest cities. By now Nick had this routine down cold: kill the strongest Specter, blackmail the governor, install one of Wrath's servants. This one required more hands-on management than usual, since Wrath's replacement wasn't especially clever. It took 3 years. Near the end of it, Nick advanced to late fanatic. The next city barely took a few months. The one after that took a bit longer, a year. The one after that, 2 years. And Wrath offered Nick something bigger, explicitly telling him he was free to refuse. One of the largest, most powerful cities in the Western Grand Continent. It belonged to none of wrath, gluttony, or lust. It was Sloth's, a southwestern bulwark separating the contested territory where 4 corruptors fought from Sloth's actual domain. Wrath's territory had grown enormously over the past decade, but this bulwark remained a serious threat. Taking it would be brutally difficult. Its ruling Specter fed on ambition. Everyone in the city simply kept living, doing exactly what they'd always done: Extractors capturing Specters, working the same jobs, with no interest in switching manufacturers, moving cities, or joining Aegis. They stayed exactly where they were, content with what they already had. Complacent. Over decades, that complacency had built something terrifying. Over 10 heroes, over 80 specialists, 5 demons, and still growing. Nobody ever left. The population wasn't especially large, but the sheer density of Extractors was staggering, practically an Extractor city in its own right. Which was exactly where it got its name. Grand Extractor City. Chapter 661, Grand Extractor City. Nick wasn't sure what to expect on arrival. When he first laid eyes on Grand Extractor City, it caught him off guard. It was big. Not wide, but tall. The city occupied barely a fourth of Crimson City's footprint, which was remarkable given how much of Crimson City's population had lived crammed into its megastructure. By area, Crimson City ranked among the smaller cities with an above-average population. Here the footprint was tiny, but to Nick's eyes, it looked like a mountain of stacked metal cubes, as if residents had simply kept building box after box atop one another. The cubes varied wildly in size, stacked unevenly, giving the whole skyline a precarious, mismatched look. The bottommost layers were uniform and neatly aligned, but by the 4th or 5th cube up, sizes began swinging wildly, a cube half the width of the one below it, topped by another twice as wide. Total chaos. The outer wall stood barely 5 meters tall at the base, yet 50 meters above it ran another wall, 10 meters tall, wrapping the city uniformly. Another 50 meters above that, a third wall, 5 meters tall. All told, the city rose about 120 meters, split across roughly 11 layers of cubes. Scaffolding was everywhere. So much scaffolding. Since the buildings stacked directly on top of each other with no proper stairwells or elevators, makeshift scaffolding served as the only way between them, and every stretch of it looked completely different. Some had towering guardrails, others had none at all. Some stood in pristine condition, others had holes wide enough for an adult to fall through. After studying the city a while, Nick understood why. Everyone maintains their own scaffolding. People were responsible for keeping their own access usable. If they couldn't afford it, they got stuck, or had to plead with a passing neighbor for a good enough offer to help. His first impression was that nobody here cared. Not about safety, not about appearance, not about efficiency. Everything had simply grown this way, and nobody bothered fixing it. But one thing here was unlike anything he'd seen before. He watched powerful extractors and wealthy citizens emerge from cubes just as shabby as everyone else's, barely any mansions, barely any visible gap between rich and poor. Even their food looked the same. Birds, they ate a lot of bird. With scaffolding threading everywhere, plenty of people lived their whole lives suspended between cubes, never once touching the ground. And since everyone lived, worked, and ate up there, plenty of things fell through the cracks, literally. The city floor was buried in garbage, waste, rot, and sludge, a paradise for insects and rodents, and the lowest level was thoroughly overrun. That, in turn, supported a thriving population of birds feeding on the critters. Oddly, there were barely any people visible on the streets at all, surprising, given the density of the place. Just a handful working. Everyone else stayed inside. Through open windows, Nick saw them sitting, sleeping, eating, staring at walls, doing nothing much. Most homes looked cluttered and unkempt, yet strangely free of pests or mold. The mess was just clutter, not decay. They're living sedentary, lazy lives, Nick thought, but keep just enough initiative to stay safe. Bland food, but nutritious enough to survive on. The city's a wreck, but a functional one. He watched a while longer. I suppose this is what sloth looks like. Good enough, barely acceptable, okay. At first the contradiction seemed strange, trash everywhere but no pests. Bland, repetitive food but a mostly healthy population. The city ran like an old machine, and the longer he watched, the more the logic revealed itself. Being sick was a hassle. Buying anything expensive was wasteful. Dealing with rodents was work. So people maintained just enough basic health and just enough cleanliness, no more, to keep lazing around as much as possible. Nick spent a long time gathering intel before daring to enter a city this powerful without understanding how it worked. The longer he watched, the more surprised he grew. They only work 5 days a week, a shock in itself, and they worked barely 6 hours a day. 30 hours a week total, and most of that spent half idle anyway. Sloth truly runs this city, he thought, brows furrowed. Over the following weeks, only a single caravan arrived, and it left quickly, complaining loudly. They hadn't even sold 1,000,000 credits worth of goods, just enough basic supplies to sustain the rats and insects at the city's bottom. Stranger still, not a single extractor ever left the city. They walked from home to work and back, 6 hours a day, nothing more. How did a city like this produce so many specters and such powerful extractors? How did anyone here even push through Zephyx or the consumption processes that demanded real willpower? Watching from outside gave Nick no answers, and gathering intel here proved harder than anywhere before. Normally he relied on overheard conversation, but these people barely spoke. Friends sat together in silence. Couples lay in each other's arms without a word. Coworkers exchanged the bare minimum. Conversation was almost non-existent. He only knew where the biggest manufacturer was. With no idea what Specters it controlled, nobody talked about anything. Eventually, Nick took a breath and closed in on the city, quickly reaching the small outer wall. He studied it. It's using Zephyx, but I can't tell for what. He circled it for a while, no guards anywhere, giving him time to study its function. This makes no sense, he thought, frustrated. None of this follows any recognizable pattern. It's completely wild. The wall was as chaotic as the city itself. He sighed. I have no idea what it does. He turned to mist and drifted up to the other walls, even more chaotic than the first. For hours, he studied the city from outside. Everything about it was chaos. And yet it worked remarkably well. For the first time, Nick had no idea how to get in. He'd always been excellent at infiltration, but only because he always gathered intelligence first, and here, there was nothing meaningful to gather. After hours of planning, he settled on something, risky but something. Finally, he steadied himself and slipped into the city. A second later, his ability deactivated.